Hey everybody, I'm Kris White with Emerging Civil War, and I'm standing in the Shiloh National Military Park with Tim Smith. Tim is one of the essay authors for our new What If book, What If Scenarios of the American Civil War. Everyone loves to play the What If game. We've got scenarios that go talk about Gettysburg, and we also have them talking about Shiloh. And we thought the perfect person to write about Shiloh would be Tim Smith. So Tim, I think What If and the myths of Shiloh kind of go hand in hand. So can you talk a little bit about your essay and about those myths of Shiloh that you've kind of deconstructed?
Sure. There are a lot of myths of Shiloh. Everything from, Buell saved Grant's bacon to the hornet's nest was the most important part here and all that. But when y'all talked to me about doing this article, I immediately went to Albert Sidney Johnston and the whole idea that if Johnston had lived, would it have made any difference? And I'm a little leery of whole what if things because that's we don't know. We just absolutely don't know. It's fun to do and so on, but I'm not sure about in narrative histories or something like that. But I like the way y'all approached it in the book, and I think it's treated very very seriously. Not overplayed, and so on about, this is exactly what would have happened and so on. And that's what I try to do in this article, dealing with Albert Sidney Johnston and basically his death. And start the article dealing with the 1917 erection of the UDC monument here, which is full of lost cause myth, basically. But the majority of it, and you get a lot of symbolism on the left and right and the different Confederate branches of service and all of that. We won't go into all that. But the centerpiece here is what is filled with the most symbolism. And you have two veiled figures in the back, of course. In the front is represented by the South. That's the Lady South. And if you notice, she's handing the laurel wreath of victory over to these two veiled figures. One represents death and one represents night. Supposedly, in one of the myths, and I deal with it just a little bit because it does have something to do with Johnston, is that if the Confederates had one more hour of daylight, they'd have won the battle. And I don't know how many times people have told me, we'd just had another hour or two of daylight, we'd have won that battle. I argue that if that had happened, and reconstructing what we know did happen, and had the Confederates run up against a very strong Union last line of defense, I'm not sure it would have made any difference. The bigger issue is Johnston's death. Night took away victory from the South, but also the other figure, death, took away victory from the South, much like Stonewall Jackson at Chancellorsville. If Jackson had lived, he would have taken the hill at Gettysburg and blah, blah, blah. But here we're talking Johnston's death, and I don't know how many people have told me also, if Johnston had just lived, we'd have won that battle. We'd have won Shiloh and maybe the war and blah, blah, blah. And so I deconstruct that a little bit and look at the effect of Johnston's death, again, attuning more toward what we know did happen as a result of Johnston's death, rather than trying to look in a crystal ball and say what would have actually happened, looking at it from the viewpoint of what actually did happen and could it have changed. Could Johnston have made a difference? The conclusion I come to is probably not. My feeling is the Confederates are already spinning their wheels way prior to Johnston's death, and I'm not sure had Johnston lived that it would have made any difference, and I'm certainly not sure that if he had lived and had a couple more hours of daylight that the any different outcome would have happened. So it was an interesting piece to work on, and it fit right into Shiloh, and worked a lot on the myths of Shiloh and all that. So it was really interesting thing, and I appreciate the opportunity to do it.
Oh, we appreciate you taking the time to write. And Tim, there was one more story I'd love for you to tell us about the Hornet's Nest. We were shooting videos on other parts of the battlefield today, and we come to the Hornet's Nest, and Tim tells this great story about modern memory and the Hornet's Nest, related to the Reed maps that are in the visitor center, as well as the motion picture that was shown in there since 1956. Can you tell us that story very quick?
Yeah. Popular memory is a tough thing to debunk sometimes, these myths and so on that get going. And you see this vividly at Shiloh. mainly in reference to the hornet's nest, and that being the most iconic and most famous and most important fighting at Shiloh. And I'm not saying it's not. I've been accused of, saying the hornet's nest wasn't even important. That's obviously not the case. But I think the hornet's nest has been overemphasized at the expense of other places on the battlefield, the Peach Orchard and the Crossroads and elsewhere. And a lot of it has to do with who's telling the story, obviously. And starting with even before the establishment of the national park in the 1890s, you had, for instance, the Hornet's Nest Veterans, a Veterans Association, getting their story out about the Hornet's Nest. Benjamin Prentice himself gets the story out. I saved the day at Shiloh and all that. But particularly when the park is established, the first historian is a guy named David W. Reed, and he will be the one literally to write the history of the battle, and he will emphasize certain things, and he emphasizes the Hornet's Nest, and it's not hard to figure out why, because he fought in the 12th Iowa, which fought right smack in the middle of the Hornet's Nest. So he's going to emphasize where he was and where his regiment was and all that kind of stuff. Now, this was built on over the course of the next several decades, really until it's institutionalized in the 1930s and 1940s, and particularly in the 1950s when a new film is made to be shown at the Visitor Center. This was actually the first narrative-style, movie-style film to be shown in the National Park Service. It really broke new ground. There's some clunkers in it, some things that aren't totally factual and so on. This was, remember, in the day before reenactors. There were no reenactors in the 1950s. That didn't really come along until the 1960s in the centennial. So they had to do the best with what they had, and it was made internally. The park historian wrote the script, and I think he even played Grant at one point. The park superintendent was the one that narrated it, so it was an internal thing, but it was really breaking new ground for its day. But that film showed, Shiloh Portrait of a Battle, showed in the Visitor Center for 56 years, up until the sesquicentennial. And you talk about having a major influence, probably more than all books and everything else, as people have come through here, and probably millions of people have seen that film. And it's going to tell you what's obviously the most important things to see, and when you see it in the film, you want to go out on the battlefield and see it. Well, the Park Service, I believe in the 1980s, put up big, huge maps of the battle in the Visitor Center. They call the Reed maps, right on the side of the Visitor Center there. And you can really see the curious workings of memory and what people are told to believe, and then they believe it, and they show they believe it, because you go to those Reed maps on the first day there, and I can just see people, I watched it every day when I was a ranger here. They come out of that film and they stop at the Reed maps, and they look and they see, ooh, Shiloh Church. I saw that in the film, and they put their finger on it and they rub a little place on the map for Shiloh Church, and it's rubbed out a little round place. It's rubbed it off the map. And then they look, ooh, Fraley Field, and they rub a little place. Ooh, there's Pittsburgh Landing, and you can almost see their wife standing there. Hey, look, there's Fraley Field, and there's Pittsburgh Landing. And they rub a little place off. Ooh, Bloody Pond, there's Bloody Pond. Look, there's Bloody Pond, and they rub a little place off. But when you get to the Hornet's Nest and the sunken road, it's not just a little place. It's a long place, all up and down the Hornet's Nest. They have rubbed out a thing probably that long. Up and down the Hornet's Nest, as if they're saying, hey, look, ooh, they told us this was important. Here it is. Now let's go out on the battlefield and see it. So it's really interesting looking at what, are we that gullible that what people tell us? Are we supposed to believe that hook, line, and sinker and believe that's the most important? Well, that's what all those people coming out of that film have done for, they did for 56 years. Fortunately, there's been some revision recently in the last several decades regarding Shiloh, as there has been Gettysburg and everything else. Hopefully putting a little more contextual spin, I don't want to say spin, but more context to it, putting the Hornet's Nest, for instance, in a more of a contextual view and in relationship with other things there. So, but it's really interesting to look at how people react.
Well, Tim, that was fantastic. So if you want to learn more about Shiloh, especially check out the What If book. And one of the featured essays is by Tim Smith talking about Shiloh and those Shiloh what ifs. You can check that out over at savisbeatty.com or over at emergingcivilwar.com. And we really thank you for being out here today at Shiloh National Military Park. And we hope that you get out here to Shiloh National Military Park. So thanks for watching, and thank you for supporting history preservation.